Alright, so this will be a very quick updated blog in relation to the tensions that we are now facing. As stated, if you follow my last post, I was talking about how the upcoming election should play a pivotal role. Nonetheless, it will be playing a pivotal role. I'd like to touch upon a subject that most people don't. This one will be, apart from everything that's been ongoing. So let me preface this video by saying that the situations that have basically occurred within this area of operations is the very fact that through a subsidiary, Apple support, the United States of America used that very company to spy on other countries. And what I mean by that is they spied on the United Arab Emirates, China, Singapore, parts of Singapore, Thailand, Taiwan, Ireland, and I believe Canada. This is all very, very fucking real and very documented. If anyone's familiar with Stingray technology, the AIM-SICD basically is one of those NSA-run tools that are now bought out by the NSA, and what they serve to better use and be implemented for in our country is to highlight the extensive use of the local chapters of surveillance under corruption, as well as any rogue operatives or any corruption that's ongoing in the area in reference to rogue radio frequency, tower surveillance, and local levels of extortion, espionage, what have you. The interesting situation about all this that I'm delving into is the fact that to this day, I don't know if it was the USA who breached the laws of the international countries or if it was the international countries that breached the laws. To put things in a nutshell, other countries cannot call us here unless we have a direct affiliation. Likewise, we can't call other countries apparently if we don't have a direct affiliation in regards to like NGOs or any group or a business subsidiary, practice, what have you. When this translates into the professional world in terms of business transactions or any type of element that inhabits these very principles, it basically has a gray area in which data transmissions, interception of connections, and all these things that occur at the local, national, and international levels blend together. As of today, I've tried making international calls to these business subsidiaries, and they've been rerouted only to the American side of the country, so everything in the USA. And this is for global numbers too, so global corporations, all that. Tell me how that happens one day after, exactly one day after, I had a very, very encrypted communications with a certain NGO that does a lot of humanitarian work around the world. And so tell me how that happens within hours. I'm going to say an ETA of like, an estimated time of 15 hours and counting. Within that communications breach, it was all like what would you call it? It was all traced, it was logged, and basically at this point in time, all these other fucking countries are now asking the very same question. So now that you guys breached the law through everybody in the area, because when they target somebody, they target everybody. So if anybody was using the phone at those hours, if anybody was doing a certain thing during those hours, they got that information. Here's where my biggest concern is, and here's where the biggest concerning factor of the cybersecurity community, as well as intel communities abroad and at home, probably are. All that data stopped being raw data, and it basically, since the US trespassed those laws, now that information, everybody's information, within like, I'm going to say a 5-mile radius, up to 25 miles, 50 miles, probably the whole country, the whole state probably, exclusively the state, is now, the raw data isn't raw data. It's already been basically given over to those countries under NDA, non-disclosure agreements, which I'm not going to get into, but basically that's what happens when countries have this type of international incident. All this information is pertinent, and of course, they don't think in terms of money. They don't think in terms of like, what is that, what is this? They think in terms of intelligence. They think in terms of very real threats that this would pose to the outside world, as well as to our nation here. Now, seeing as how these interceptions happened here, seeing as how they happened due to customer support, and basically all the precedents that were set forth during the Apple versus the United States of America in terms of privacy sectors are non-applicable anymore. All that information from every phone is basically was basically given for free to other countries. In return, I presume they gave us information for free too, because that's the way it should work. If anybody's fans of open source intelligence and open source technologies, you know that the very pivotal factors of those human intelligence networks are largely the people. It's not even about national secrets at this point. It's about cooperation. So when you share something, for anybody that has friends abroad, such as I stated multiple times, I have friends that are in all parts of the world. And so largely any entrepreneur that wanted to, for any of these people, or even anyone that's hearing within my general vicinity, if they wanted to start a intel agency on their own that was privatized, and then they booked it with a organization, they could list it as anything. I believe it would only cost anywhere from like $30 to $100, and basically you could put in any of these legal documents in place. You could basically have privacy. You'd have to go through a few government sectors, but I advise anyone to start at the international level, because that's largely where all this would be happening. That said, that being possible, there are many open intelligence networks that are in the public domain and in the public sector that anyone can use, and that's largely reflective of the failures for the systems that we currently have implemented to actually even assist the I would call it consumer, civilian entities, what have you, at large. We pay over $200 billion, but all that money was for nothing, because when you have all these open source networks, all these open source technologies that are basically working for the people, developed by either prior hackers, white hats, black hats, all over the world, basically they give everything for free, because that's how you build diplomacy. That's how you build better relationships with the world. You handshake, right? Which they're saying during COVID you shouldn't do. I say bullshit to that. I say that is irrelevant. When we're living in a world that is prone to hacking, prone to corruption, and prone to all types of bullshit, evidenced by that phone that arrived that was suspicious. I'm still in talks with the entities, subsidiaries. And yeah, evidenced by all that shit, given my ethnicity, all of that crap is just another fucking means as to why these intelligence networks matter. As far as tax dollars go, funding these programs, everybody's tax dollars go to that bullshit, but none of these open source ask for any money per se, because they're not run upon money. They're run upon what people contribute. They're run upon what people believe in. They're run upon basically any factor except currency. That poses a very real threat to the outside world, as well as to the, I would say, to the national security of this country. However, there have been many advocates that advocate for the use of open source technologies, simply for the fact that they're built on the people, pillars, and we don't need to have more money wasted on these programs when we already get less than, I'm going to estimate it at about 20% of all of the intelligence that we need in this country. We don't get it. And so when we're wasting $200 billion or even more on the wrong administration, such as the FBI, it just highlights a perfect picture. Even law enforcement. If anybody's going to contribute to an agency, you should consider contributing to NGOs. You should consider contributing to the CIA. You should consider contributing to anything that's actually abroad legally, and see where that gets you, because largely they operate within the same framework as our government. They just have different political affiliations and political identities. That doesn't mean they don't have the same type of systems. It doesn't mean they don't have intelligence networks. It does not mean that they're not learning languages. It does not mean that they don't know how to communicate with each other effectively. That said, at this current point in time, every single thing is already breached, every single thing is traced, and it was all because Apple decided to, or I don't know who, but somebody decided to breach connection in real time when they called a certain number from overseas. That basically sealed the deal. This is very concerning during the upcoming election, because now it's not only one country that knows this shit, it's a bunch of countries, a bunch of media outlets, and largely because Edward Snowden alluded to this shit. At the same time, while I'm making this transmission, it could be very well intercepted in real time and sub-layered on a lower frequency, such as 2G, 3G networks, for the sole purpose of actually censoring it. And if that does happen, then it just highlights a better picture of how intrusive the programs are here. What's the fix to this? I could just smash this phone right now to pieces right after recording this shit, and it's indexed by the National Security Agency and other NGOs. So I might as well do that, right? At the same time, all of these things that are ongoing affect the consumer, affect every single person, and that leads me to my following point, which is was intended to be my main point. Nonetheless, what is America's purpose in relation to the world? This was something that was talked about during the First World War and Second World War. largely, most people believe we got into that war because we saw the need for democracy and the failure to uphold democracy in other countries. Fast forward a few years later, from the Second World War in the 40s, enter the UN, enter peacekeeping operations, enter NGOs, enter the CIA, enter the Cold War, etc. at all. You have all these governing bodies that were created for the sole purpose of averting all of these wars. Now, in reference to the diplomacy missions abroad, I want to make one thing very clear, and one thing clear, as very clear as I can. All of these ways in which the military goes abroad, and this is reflective of every country, so I will focus on the USA, they don't go on diplomacy missions, they go on objectives. So anybody can do that, any government has. Do I need to remind people the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets, the invasion of Vietnam by the USA, the invasion of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, as well as the reciprocal of Okinawa and such more. All these things happen because people fail to come together. Anyways, that leads me to the main point, which is, what is our current objective abroad in reality? People really need to question this. That differs very, very much from foreign policy. Stepping into a country for the purpose of democracy or diplomacy varies as well. So democracy, diplomacy, and objectives that are militant based, they're all different. An NGO could be present in a country such as the United Nations, or something like the Red Cross, or something like, I don't know, the World Health Organization, which isn't really a similar organization, but these could all be present in a given country. The UN largely could be present in a country. They don't have political objectives, and I will keep reiterating that point. They're there to keep the peace. They're there to only support the mission, bridge connections between the people, and make sure that the integrity and values of the Charter are maintained, preserved as best as they can be. That does not mean that by any means it is a perfect organization, but at base, the peacekeepers are the ones that make the organization have continuity. The same way in which boots here in the USA make the military have continuity in terms of turmoil, as well as generally when we're not in use. So right now, there are so many people that are actually deployed. They're probably stationed in many bases across the United States. We're not in a war, but they're deployed. So that's where the militant objective-based thinking comes in. In reference to peacekeeping operations, militaries, as stated, do have a political objective. So they step foot in another country. In retrospect, what happened with Afghanistan and the weapons of mass destruction during the Bush administration, as I stated, we now know we have nukes, similar to the Vietnam, similar to the invasion of Afghanistan during the 70s Cold War, etc. at all. These were countries that engaged other countries with national political objectives in mind. Keeping in mind we have G100 and we have other forms of smaller, underrepresented forms of governments around the world. It doesn't really make any sense currently to bring our own ideologies when we're very much not liked. And maybe, as I stated before, the focus should be foreign policy, inclusivity, exclusivity, and more integration between nations. Now, let me touch upon diplomacy. Diplomacy is nothing at all comparable to these previous aforementioned subjects and methods of, I would say, contribution. Peacekeeper, you're still a soldier. Military, you're still a soldier. Diplomacy, you're very much a diplomat. You get stationed in a country, and it is your job and duty to basically build better relations within the civilian sector. And most people are heavily disliked for that because the civilian sector is widely ignorant. And at the same time, furthermore, there's stigmatization due to race issues and supremacy. And it's not just one given race that has it. Every race wants to be the best race, and that's a given. However, when we're dealing with national identity and diplomacy, supremacy needs to be put on hold for a very brief moment, at the very least. We need to re-examine our priorities. We need to really ask ourselves collectively, would this be in our best interest? Or is this going to spark international incidents? How did the Cuban Missile Crisis start? How did any of these surveillance things that were exposed in prior years begin? It all began because of one person. It all began because of an area. It began because of a state, because of a country, a region, etc. And we still have this going on widely across the world. By no means is it in my capability to discuss what goes on in other countries, apart from the fact of what is going on due to displacement. At the same time, I live in the United States of America, so speaking very openly on these topics and matters is something that I very much find necessary. I very much find it a pivotal element of our democratic society, and I do my best to embody it in any way, shape, form that I can. Unless we open up dialogue to more cooperative efforts overall, so not just some people, not just some states, everybody. And don't mistake this with the globalism movement. This is by far different, because we're still preserving our identity, we're still preserving what country we are, but it doesn't make sense to basically be on the offensive against every other country during a time when we're still going to see another possible tariff situation, more lack of imports, we're not going to be exporting a lot, and more business sector inequalities. Yes, we have inequality in this country too. All those factors are still going to play a major role. It's currently 2020. It's the beginning of a brand new decade. For the past few decades, we've been pretty much solidified in our political ideals. However, that has already changed almost overnight, almost through a mere work of magic, I would say. The real trouble that and real thing that alarms me and most anybody else that's well informed on the subject of privacy, data transmissions, and transparency within governments is the following. If this continues, our country's identity and the way in which we operate is going to see major reform. We're already seeing it currently. 30, 40 years ago, if you would have asked anybody, hey, prove this, man, how can that be? They would have looked at you and been like, yeah, you're going to have to go through XYZ and it's going to be very impossible. Now, all you got to do is submit a request and you get shit like within a few weeks. If you pay for it, you get it even faster. At the same time, all of these, every single thing that is indexed is basically kept on computers, files, networks, databases that are very much like, for example, this park. This is a big fucking park. The FBI headquarters, which stores all these communications in conjunction with the NSA, CIA, and other forms of intelligence groups that are private, unknown, and unclassified at the moment, or declassified, have very big places in which these things happen. At the same time, every single thing that is indexed is subject to being used at any and all times, and the NSA can pull up any file within mere seconds, because all they got to do is cross-reference every single thing within a given database. They don't even use last names, or they don't even use, in case anybody has another identity, they don't even use names. They use voice pitch, they use facial recognition, and they use your school, any school. Y'all remember having a library card, or going to a certain high school? Think again, all those systems were in place for a reason. Everything that is being talked about is widely public domain, but at the same time, most people are ignorant to the fact. And this is largely how minorities are, in the case that I'm dealing with, basically set up for all these things to make it seem like you're a foreign agent, a form of spy, an espionage provocateur, or something like that. Even worse, certain other elements of these situations that are very real affect journalists in a multitude of ways. And unless we see more reform, which needs to be also considering our political interests, it'll be very hard to differentiate between who is an actual asset to the country, who is a detriment to the country, who is a political affiliation to the country, and who just doesn't give any fucks. To bring things to a close for this podcast, that video that I uploaded in terms of what is happening and all that shit, and the media that I've contacted, here's what's going on. Everybody within this area was dubbed a spy, a form of spy, due to the nature of the situation. How? Because other countries have leverage. So every single person is going to be named in that. Now that they have the raw data, and it was provided by Apple, everybody's going to be looked at as a spy, whether people believe it or not. And I hope people don't believe it, because then maybe this doesn't cause that much controversy and people are just unaware. But I'm choosing to make this video in public for a very specific reason. And so all of these things that are ongoing have just affected the entirety of this city, state. And now everybody's literally, their data clusters are declassified, and there's no way to stop that, because if you try to go to the cops, or if you try to go to the feds, or even the CIA, then you got to go to the NSA. And if you go to the NSA, you got to go to M16. And if you go to M16, which I highly doubt anyone has authorization to do, then you got to go to the Mossad. And if you go to the Mossad, then you got to go back to the fucking USA intel agencies. And if you go back to them, then you got to go to the Middle Eastern's intel agencies. And if you go to those intel agencies, you got to go to China's and it's a triangle, circle, call it whatever you want. That's how it operates now. There's surveillance pyramids in the USA. It's local, national, international. Now it's not going from like bottom to top, it's going from top to bottom. So the pyramid got inversed. And I don't know what that's going to mean for the upcoming election. Are people going to say that this state alone is going to engage in ballot harvesting or fraud or some type of thing? Are they going to say that our entire country has been engaging in fraud and deceptive practices? Is the election already in the bag for Biden? What does this mean for our cooperative efforts with other countries? Stay tuned. Voltaire out.